Welcome back to the Moving Grief podcast. I am Heather Stang.
And I am Jason Wendroff-Rawnicki. We are so glad to be here today just to talk about self-care and the new year, especially around grief, because there are so many misconceptions, I feel, when even just using the word self-care. And I want to make sure that we talk about what that actually means and how we can apply it into our everyday life.
How do you define self care?
So I think of self-care just like literally as as the phrase suggests, taking care of yourself. And that could take on so many different forms, from what we eat to our movement to our daily rituals. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I need to get a massage at a spa. It could, and that could be part of it, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be all of the little things that you do on a daily basis to take care of you.
I really like that you're including all the aspects, even what I call the givens, which are movement, hydration, nutrition, and sleep.
Yes.
I add a little extra definition to the word self care with my group just because I feel the idea of habit, that word, that 5-letter word that just feels like so impossible at times. That habitual self care is so important. So I define self care as regularly practiced activities that include
Mhm.
all those little things. It may include journaling, it might include coffee with a friend if that
Yeah.
helps your mental health, if it's a good friend. It might include the massages. But I like the idea of regularly practiced activities because that's what ultimately builds up resilience.
Yeah, I agree. And you say habit, and I say it as ritual, right? Like,
I
because
like
that
rituals so much better. I think I'm going to rewrite my whole rhetoric right here, right now, because habit feels like something a stern teacher would say. Or I was thinking about when I learned piano or tried to learn piano as a kid, and it was like, you must practice. There was like no joy in it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I was just listening to a lecture yesterday about how that repetition, that type of repetition, takes our enjoyment out of learning and out of learning to learn and learning to grow. And it's really important to make sure that we have that excitement. And so whatever language that you need to use, whether it's habit or ritual, is really important to the way we look at things as well.
Ritual just sounds more um, intentional, and there's choice
Yeah.
and meaning in it too. And we can take for granted those little things like choosing the water over a soda or getting good sleep instead of watching television all night.
And we make choices, whether they're like unconscious or body choices. We're making those choices all the time, whether we realize they're choices or not. And I think that's a big part of the self-care, is noticing which behaviors support the movement in which you want to go and which kind of pull you in the opposite direction.
Grief is something that nobody chooses. And
Correct.
there's so many feelings, situations that happen that are choiceless after a loss. And I feel like part of our grief work is learning what we can control and exerting our intention over those things so that we can have the resilience and the strength to let go of the things that we cannot. And
Yeah.
self care is one of those things that you can start to practice taking back control with that will have exponential benefits.
Yeah. And one of the things, and I know this is going to sound harsh when I say it, but it's something that really affected me in this realization that nobody's really coming to save us. Like, we have to take those actions. We have to take that responsibility. Yes, we had no control over the loss of our loved one, for sure, but how we respond to it, we do. We absolutely do. Waves of emotion come over us. They're overwhelming. They can be really painful at times, but learning how to make those choices is part of the tools and strategies that we need to develop as part of as a griever, so that this way when those waves comes, we have those, we know what to do to manage those things.
You said something that is harsh but true. And we talk about that a lot in group because I feel like doing grief work is also about reestablishing a relationship to self, maybe a relationship to yourself you never had before. Because you're
Right.
right. Unfortunately, no one else is coming to
Right.
save us. We have to save ourselves. And as gosh, I wrote in Navigating Loss about this, and I said I have a love hate relationship with this idea because I both hate that there's no one's going to ride it on a white horse and fix it. Not that being said, of course, people like you and I are going to support you. Those of you who are listening, you have friends. It's not that you're alone and isolated, but it's that internal relationship to self that you will learn how to reestablish. And that's the love part, because once you start noticing that happening, it makes you feel more empowered. And personally, I don't know about you, Jason, but I've found that the more I'm able to support myself, the more I'm able to accept support from others.
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%. Yeah, and that's definitely something right now that I'm like, that's a good conflict in my own personal experiences. Yes, I am 100% responsible for all my successes and all my failures, right? And when do I reach out for help? And we've been talking about this a little bit, even around my own website, right? Like, when do I be like, help? I need to get someone to help me out with this thing. And yes, it is total like a seesaw that happens where asking for help, though, is part of taking care of yourself, right? Like it's part of that self care, paying for the services that you need, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a coach, whether it's a massage therapist or a yoga class or whatever it is, paying for those services that are going to help to support you and move you forward. That's really where your responsibility comes in.
Absolutely. Or a book, or
Yeah.
your general practitioner, scheduling those appointments to just get your checkups. That's part of self care too. I think we're alluding at the beginning that self care is often seen as go to a spa, go on vacation, have some guru come and give you an internal makeover, whatever it is. And it's like self care, or it's these little incremental things really add up. I've run into many people over the couple decades I've been doing this work where they'll come in and be like, "Oh, I just probably need more time. I don't have time and money for a massage or whatever the thing is." And I'm like, "Okay, hold on. How you sleeping?
Yeah.
How's your diet? How are you eating?" And it's these really basic things that we can skip over. I'm guilty of that too,
Yeah.
where we look at these big fixes as the thing when
Mm-hmm.
it's really these little rituals.
Yep.
I'm going to use your word that add up.
Yeah, 100%. It's these little 1% improvements that you need to make every single day. Like we think, oh, I need to be, I don't know, 100% better by next week or something like that. We give ourselves these crazy expectations rather than what can I do to make myself 1% better today? And then if you do that every day, 1%, which is not a lot, then by the end of the week, it's 7%. By the end of the month, it's 30%. By the end of the year, it's 365% better, right? So if we take those little 1% improvements, but just be consistent over time, like for me, that's the key. It's not about overcoming these huge hurdles, but these little bumps.
That just made me wonder if compound interest applies to self care.
Yeah.
We're going
Well,
to run this by my mother, the mathematician, and get the actual, if you did 1% change a day, what would it be by the end of the year? But we won't go into that right now because that'll just make people turn off and run away
Yeah,
because,
right,
yeah.
right. But no, but I do believe we have to hit a critical mass, right?
Mhm.
Because what happens is that people say, "Oh, I did this one thing this one day and it doesn't create change. I don't see a difference. Oh, I ate well. I ate an apple today instead of a candy bar, right? And oh, I don't see a difference, right? But if you continue to do that every single day, and then with each day you make other adjustments, then you're going to eventually hit a critical mass, and then you're going to see the change. So that self-care once a month, okay, you may not see any difference, but then over the course of, if you do it daily, then you'll eventually start to see a difference.
Right. So this leads to a question that I was asking myself that led to actually our group topic this week in Awaken. And it is, how do you find motivation to do self care practices when you don't enjoy doing them? And what this led to, and this is something that I can include a link in the description below. It led to this matrix, and I'm calling it the personality needs and self care matrix.
Okay.
In this matrix, I listed out our core personality needs. And this comes from my training in integrated attachment theory through the personal development school. So these are our basic personality needs: love and connection,
Mhm.
certainty, novelty, significance,
Yep.
growth, and contribution. And of course,
Gotcha.
there's a whole bunch of little things under there. These are just the big things,
Yeah, those are the big.
the
Yep.
big basics, right? And
Yep.
so in that's the first column. Second column, what does each of these things mean? And in the third column, what are some self-care practices that will feed that personality need? So
Yeah.
we took the idea in group of meditation, and where would where does meditation meet any need for you? And for some people, it might be around the love and connection, like that meta meditation practice feeds that part of their soul. For other people, it's about spiritual growth.
Yeah.
We also looked at just what are your top personality needs, because some of us, like for me, love and connection is like my number one personality need. And then right on the heels of that, and I've done a whole practice around this, and I help my people figure out what are their personality needs in order. Under that is also certainty, is really important to me. And that probably comes from my wacky, uncertain childhood. And we were talking about, okay, figure out what your personality need and what is a self-care practice that will fit into that for you. And when you can match up your personality needs and your self-care practices, there the friction is significantly reduced
Right.
because it's meeting that need. And so you're more excited about it.
Yeah. And I'm going to even take that a step further, right? Because we those six basic needs, we may have one that we're more prone to, or we lean more toward, or that's our home personality. But all six of those needs in our lives need to be met in some way, shape, or form. And so when an activity meets one of the needs, uh, we may do it, we may not do it. When an activity meets two of those needs, we're going to be more inclined to do it. When it meets three or more of the needs, then we're like obsessed with doing it. So
Absolutely. 100%.
for me, when I look at something like that, I'm like, okay, how can I use an activity to meet more than one of my basic needs? So we'll give exercise or movement is a great example, right? I get up in the morning. That's the first, like one of the first, I do some affirmation and then I have to get up and move. And so movement is one of those things that gives me certainty because it's a ritual. I do it almost every morning. It's very ritualistic, and so now it meets my need of certainty. But how I do it is different. some mornings. So some mornings I'll go run. Some mornings I'll do a little strength training. Some mornings I'll ride my bike. So that now not just meets my need of certainty, but also meets my need of novelty and variety. If we can start to find those self-care needs that meet three or four of them, right? And then I push myself in my workout. I try to get myself stronger. So there's growth, right? There's that growth and expansion. So if you can get one self-care thing to meet three needs, you're going to do it regardless. It's going to start to become in you. And then you won't have to rely on motivation. That's the key, right? Because all right, like motivation is fickle. It comes and it goes, right? We can't rely on motivation. There are times where, yes, I'm going to go crush it. And there are times where I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to stay in bed. So we can't rely on motivation. That's why like those rituals and meeting those needs are so important, because it takes the motivation off the table and really gets down into your core cellular structures, and then you'll go and do it.
You are absolutely right. And that was the conversation following the first looking at what these are, what are we doing? How can you take something you're already doing that's meeting a need and add in another one?
Yeah.
So it might be that for you, you love hiking. It hits your growth because it's making you stronger. It also helps you be more present to yourself. There's love and connection, but there's a part of you that's really yearning for some novelty, maybe getting on a different path. You want love and connection, maybe getting in a group. So maybe you're
Yep.
now hiking with a group of people. There's certainty because you're going to have the same group of people. Maybe there's significance because you get to suggest some of your favorite hiking paths. Like there's so many ways to use this to take something you're already doing that maybe you're feeling a little resistance towards. How can I make this more exciting for myself or more enjoyable, more pleasurable by meeting more of those needs? And then another question that I had was, are there any personality needs that you're not getting met or that are really low on the scale? And what could you do to experiment and play around with those too? So I love that you and I both, it's so funny because they're things we both do that we don't know each other does.
Yeah. And we use a little bit of a different language, right? But
Right.
it's the same essence, right?
It's the same essence. And I love that in this conversation, you're like, yeah, I do that like too. So that makes me feel love and connected.
Yeah. And that's right. And that's one reason that we're doing this podcast,
Yeah.
because we've both have been doing our own separate things in our own separate spaces with our own separate communities. And we can feel really lonely doing that. So how do we like have that love and connection with helping not just ourselves grow and our businesses grow, but helping other people grow? And it's giving contribution to anyone who's listening to this, because hopefully they're finding some value in it and able to start to look at what are their six basic needs and how are they getting them met.
Right. I want to take us back a little bit to the person who might be listening to this and thinking self care, that is just not going to fit on my plate right now. I am having to take care of my grieving family. I'm having to work a few jobs and make ends meet because maybe I've lost my income due to a death, or just there's all these things that are so heavy, big, and overwhelming that self care feels very much like a luxury.
Yeah. And
Not
I
even a
want like
luxury. Let me just say a pipe dream, like just a fantasy.
yeah, I totally want to bring that back to the six basic needs, right? Because even thoughts like that, like I'm overwhelmed, I have to work my tail off to make like those are also serving our needs as well, right? Like looking at those in the framework of those basic needs. And I love the people that use their grief as giving them for significance, right? There are people who will stand up in front of anytime they have the opportunity, will tell people how miserable and how much in pain they are and how nobody understands. And they'll stand up in a group. And sometimes that gives you significance, even though it's like in the sort of, I don't want to say negative way, but it's just in a way in which it serves that need for you. And so things like, oh, I don't have the time, right? That may give you certainty. You're filling up your schedule so much with all of the things that you know that you don't give yourself, it gives you certainty, but then it doesn't make the space for variety. So I hope that made sense, that what I was saying. Because when we look at our six basic needs, we have to let go of this is the good part of it and this is the bad part of it, right? Because it all works the same. It's all, everything that we do can fit into one of our six basic needs. I do believe that.
That's actually true. Our behaviors, the choices we make, we do to satisfy needs. And some of those choices are skillful, some of them are unskillful.
Yep.
And I'll give the caveat that grief is not finishing school. You are not expected to show up in white gloves with your hair coiffed and do this perfectly at all. There is something to being able to say, I'm hurting and this is awful and it is painful. I think there's a difference between how, and I'm going to my own, I'm going to go to my own stuff. There are times where I've said this is awful and painful in a way to because of anger and rage, which
Hmm.
is fair. There are also times where I've said this is awful and painful with an attitude of self compassion, where it's like a holding my own pain. It's hard to put words to the difference.
Yeah.
There's shame, I think, in the first one, is what I want to think of, is what I'm getting to. As someone who grew up in a house where things like you shouldn't be feeling that way, don't cry, stop that crying, I'll give you something to cry about. You really learn to feel shame around feeling.
Yeah.
And so there can be this protest behavior where you're
Mhm.
both feeling upset, sad, hurt, but you're feeling bad about feeling bad. There's also a feeling sad and hurt and in pain where there's an understanding. I've been through something really hard.
Yeah.
This hurts and I care deeply about it. I think that's the biggest growth I've had in my life,
Yeah.
where the old Heather, who was actually the younger Heather, I always find that funny. The older, younger Heather just did not have a level of comfort with discomfort that I have now. And the difference is my behavior afterwards. So the old Heather, and I will do post 21-year-old Heather, would cope with that by drinking.
Mm.
The new Heather copes with that by self soothing in healthier ways. If it's warm out, it's usually a walk, it's petting the dog, it's stretching, it's meditation, it's journaling. And so this is a nuance, right? Around feelings and what we do with them and the self care afterwards.
Yeah. And it's really important to understand that everybody's patterns are so different, right? Like you were just sharing like kind of your pattern
Yeah,
and what conditioned you, but the same thing, like talking about your grief and talking about your pain can also be for love and connection as well. Like it could
sure.
be the same thing, right? Or it could serve both at the same time, right? So when you find your tribe, even in my peer support groups, we're definitely, it's all about love and connection, but it's also about growth as well. So we want to make sure that we include that component in there so that it's not just rehashing the story over and over and again without that sort of forward. And as a leader, that's in my head all the time. Like, how do we get how do I get my people to move forward rather than it's because it's so easy just to stay with the certainty, right? Like just to stay with what we know, because that's what our brain is so good at. And it's like, how do we do those things for variety and getting us moving forward and for the love and connection so that we can eventually get to the growth and the contribution part of it?
Yeah. I feel like a group inherently leads to contribution.
Yeah.
Be-
At least for the leader, right? At least for the person running the group, right?
I'm going to say for the members,
That too,
because
yeah.
I, that's where I do both private sessions and run groups.
Yeah.
And I like to think of the private sessions are for when people are really early in their grief. They're not ready to be seen. Maybe they have something really personal tied to their story that they don't want other people to know.
Yeah.
But I feel like the big transformation happens when somebody shares something that maybe before felt like a certain story. It's going to keep me in my grief. And then someone's, wow, that really helped me, what you just said. And then
Yeah.
the person sharing the story has automatically been into contribution. I
Right.
just,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
do you
I
know what
got you.
I mean? I feel
Yes.
like having your story witnessed, not judged, not critiqued. Nobody is allowed to compare anyone's group. Like, we would not do that. That's just not the type of people in my group. Plus, it's a group standard, right? But
Yep.
to be like, wow, I really appreciate how you handled this, or I hadn't thought of doing it that way. That shifts the story from one of being stuck to one of growth.
Yeah.
I love groups. Can I just say that?
Yeah. Yeah, they both serve a very different function for sure. Because I do both privates as well and group. And they're very different. They're just very different, but they both serve in a very different way.
Absolutely. And I will continue to do both.
Yeah.
I'm always happy when somebody shifts from private into group, because there's a lot I can do as a facilitator, as a grief educator, but grief inherently is a community experience. We have our
Yeah.
family, we have our friends, we have the other people that were associated with the person that died. And I just feel like humans are wired to adapt to life after loss in community.
Hmm.
And sometimes that grief group community gives you a place to practice being in your natural community.
Yeah. It's that love and connection, right? It's that,
Absolutely.
oh, knowing that even there are many times where I'll send out like a newsletter or an email, and someone that I don't even know or has never come to a group will send me an email back. Thank you for sending me these emails. I know I'm not alone. And I'm like, and that connectivity, we are wired for connection for sure. And the groups are really fantastic for that. I love, I, I thrive on the private one-on-one work because I love to look at people's patterns and see how the conditioning and how to tweak that kind of stuff and get forward movement from that because it's very different. I also think that's important to put grief into the context of our lives as
Mhm.
well, so that it doesn't just take over, which it's very can easily do. It could just be your entire identity. But once you put it back into the context of everything else, then it can be a really force to move you forward.
Self care can take you into that whole person place too, though,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
you're grieving. And that's for most people, not everybody, but most people, they are going to be preoccupied with grief in the early period, which we don't give a timeline to. The acute grief, we'll just say you're
yep.
preoccupied with grief. And self care starts to open you up to other things
Yeah.
just by shifting your focus to
Yeah.
either yourself or to the people you're connecting with, to the activity you're doing. And it doesn't diminish your love for the person
Right.
at all, because that is not going to diminish. It just isn't. Have you ever seen anybody love less as they move away from deep pain?
Oh no, absolutely. You can let go of the pain, but you can still keep the
Yes.
memories, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The,
That's
it
the one thing. But it takes work.
it does.
It's not, oh, all of a sudden, whoop, pain's
Oh no.
gone. Here's the merit. No, it's those small 1% improvements
Yeah.
over time.
And it's usually a shock. I'm sure you've had this experience yourself and with clients where they're like, I laughed and then I realized I was laughing and then I started crying because I felt awful for laughing. It's so it's so prevalent, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
100%. Yeah.
and that's part of the shift that happens. We talked last
Yeah.
night actually in my group about comedy as self-care.
100%. Oh, let me give you, it's perfect. During the pandemic, right? Everything got so heavy, like just in general, just as a way of, and so my wife and I, every night for probably about, I want to say a few months, maybe even 6 months, we would turn on comedy an hour, like at right before bed. We would listen to an hour of comedy right before bed so that we can laugh and we can break up the tension. I absolutely believe very heavily that laughter can change your entire physiology. We could do a whole episode on that, but because there's a whole laughter yoga where it just changes your physiology. They say that laughing for 30 minutes is equivalent to running for 30 minutes. So as far as cardiovascular and heart health, so it can totally change your physiology. So I am a big fan of laughter as self-care for sure.
Just the words laughter yoga together make me think
Yeah.
of the times I've done laughter yoga and I all of a sudden start laughing because it's like such an experience.
Yeah.
And we've even
Yeah.
had laughter yoga people come in and do a workshop at the Association of Death Education and Counseling meeting. And
Yeah.
I've facilitated grief retreats where they've pulled in a laughter yoga person and people who think they're never going to laugh again are laughing because it's not even about content. It's just about being silly. Like usually you start off by just breathing, oh, 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 oh.
Yeah.
And just doing that in a group of
Yeah.
people, you get
Yeah.
silly, you get to play, you get to actually let go of that tension.
Yeah. Well, let's do that as our tool for today. Does that sound? I love that as our tool. We always give a tool, and I don't know what the tool is going to be before we get on these conversations, but I think that is a great tool, right, for self-care. And it's really super simple, right? So you just need to start off with a ha, right? So actually, you know what? If you can, if you're in a safe space, right, just take your hand like onto your belly, and then just give it a little ha,
Ha,
ha.
ha,
I'm already starting to giggle, right? Now do it twice. Ha ha.
ha,
Ha ha.
ha, ha, ha,
And then three times. Ha ha ha.
ha, ha, ha,
Ha ha
ha,
ha.
ha, ha.
Let's do 6 times. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha ha. Oh, now we're gonna go through the vowels. Ha, ho, he, hi, who. Ha 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 ha. Ho 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 ho. Hoo 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 hoo. Hee 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 hee. Ha 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 ha. Ho 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 ho. Hoo 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 hoo. Ah,
Oh, I'm just thinking about
right.
this being out there for the internet. I hope you all are enjoying this as much as we are.
Yeah. And even if they're not, Heather, I think we are
We
completely.
are, right? Oh my
And
gosh.
just doing that, and I can already I could feel it in my face. I feel how much like I'm starting to get even a little sweaty. So it just like all of the physiological changes of just simple laughter,
Oh, how do I follow
right?
that?
Right. And we need more laughter, not in our just in our world in general. We need to stop taking ourselves so seriously.
Yeah, and finding the thing that makes you laugh.
Yeah.
It could be rolling around with your animal or your child or watching something silly on TV or putting on a comedy podcast. Um, sitting around, my best friend and I will sit around and talk about how we should have a podcast, although nobody would actually probably really find it funny, but we think we're hilarious. And we're both working to make each other laugh. We'll just sit on the couch and just be ridiculous, knowing what those shows are. So I'm going to encourage everybody listening, your home practice this week is going to be to go and find something that makes you laugh and
Yep.
maybe try some laughter yoga. Maybe just do exactly what Jason led you through because I needed that.
Right. So no, what did you like? How did you notice that shifted even your own physiology? Right.
So you and I are recording this in the morning ish. And so coming to the podcast, I was a little groggy, excited, but groggy. I feel more awake and alert. I really felt my diaphragm relax.
Mm.
You and I were talking about sleep right before the podcast, and we
Yeah.
figured out I got basically 9 hours of sleep last night, which is great. I love my sleep. And so my body has been in that sleep mode position.
Yep.
So I don't want to say stiffness, but just I feel looser. I
Yeah.
feel
Good.
lighter. I feel sillier.
There's one thing I also want to make sure I wanted to cover in today's podcast about the holidays and that self-care, because the holidays, I know for me, throws my rituals like way out of whack. I noticed it the more the more I have that structure in my life, which I absolutely love, the more I notice when it gets sidetracked. And so don't beat yourself up, especially in the new year, to get those rituals back on track, because so often, I know with me, it takes a hot minute to get back to better eating because I was eating all kinds of cookies and cakes and pies and
I'm sorry,
yeah,
wait, what? Jason
yes, yes,
was eating
yes,
cookies, cakes.
cakes and pies and drinking
Y'all,
eggnog and
what?
yes. But because you can't make your I really believe you need to have moderation even with moderation, right? You need to go out and have a good time and go out to dinner, go have a drink or two, right? You need to not feel like you're restricting yourself when you because once again, we need that certainty of okay, these are what the things I need, and we also need that variety as well to be able to just get off your own leash and go a little wild. So yeah, I need that for myself. And but then I'm like, okay, I did that. Now I have to come back to our certainty. So it's all about bringing it back to those rituals. And I'm still tailoring that after the holidays, and it's already when we're what are we recording? What is it? The 15th. So it's already 2 weeks after the holidays. It's and I'm just dialing it in. I'm still in 2 weeks later. I'm still dialing it in.
So that I have this certainty around you eating so clean. And I know you're not perfect, you're not, but I probably have you up on a pedestal. So this gave me a little bit of novelty,
Yeah,
picturing you
yeah,
drinking the eggnog.
right. Right.
We all know I drink the eggnog and eat the cookies and bake the
Yeah.
stuff, but that's important.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, just being gentle with yourself as you're
Yeah.
readapting to life after the holidays and the new year. I want to close with a practice that's going to bring it a little bit back to grief, but merge it with the humor.
Yeah.
And this is about remembering a funny time with your loved one.
Mm.
So, your practice, we're not going to do it on the podcast because it would just be a bunch of silence. Set aside a little bit of time and think about a time when you had fun with your person and write about it or just remember it or verbally share the story with someone you love. Some of my favorite memories are those humorous times with the people I love. And that can both bring together our love, our yearning, and our grief, which can be a gateway into getting comfortable with humor and getting comfortable with letting go of the pain.
Yeah, I love that practice of because then we remember how they lived and
Yes.
not just the way they died. Like it's that reason that they were here to begin with, the reason that we loved them. And so I know for me, the story that I always remember, and she wasn't even in it, but she like so My sister loved, and I'll do the thing verbally right now.
Yes.
So my sister Lauren loved to smoke. Like she was a smoker. She was like, my dad was a smoker. She was a smoker. And so I remember one day walking into the main bathroom in the family, and I go look in the toilet, and there's first of all, I smell smoke and her Aquanet hairspray. Like that was the first thing I noticed when I entered the door was Aquanet and cigarette smoke. I was like, ooh, okay, all right. Not a surprise, but I look in the toilet and I see a cigarette butt floating around in the toilet. And then I look up and there was a little tiny window above the tub that was slid open. And just from seeing the cigarette butt in the toilet and the open window, I realized, and I have this image, even as I'm telling the story, I have the image in my head because she was really short. And there's no way she would have been able to get to that window without standing on the tub. So I can just see her standing on the tub, smoking her cigarette and blowing it out the window. And then trying to flush it down the butt down the toilet, but then it didn't go down. So I remember telling her, I said, listen, if you're going to smoke in the house and blow it out the window and flush the butt, make sure it goes all the way down because mom and dad would be really pissed. And she was like, slapped her head and she giggled and she's, thanks, bro.
Like you did not do a very good job. You would be a
Right, of
horrible
covering your
criminal.
tracks. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, that's cute.
But the image of her, like, and it's just like a mental image of her standing on the tub because there's no way she would have gotten to that window. Yeah, otherwise.
I'll share a story and then we'll say our goodbyes. But
Yeah.
this is an old loss. Not a lot of weight around it in terms of pain, just a lot of joy. And this was my granddad, who died back in 1988. When he died, my parents were going through a divorce, which had totally blindsided me. I was not in a great place. I was 17, so that whole teenager about to graduate high school. And my granddad died on Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, 1988. Now, my funny story happened back in 1979 when my family and I had first moved to Frederick, Maryland, and we took my grandparents from North Carolina to a Mexican restaurant. And
Okay.
my granddad opened up the menu and he goes, Taco. What's a taco? And he had his first taco. And the fact that he died on Cinco de Mayo that year didn't mean a thing to us. But now, every Cinco de Mayo, we eat
You have
tacos.
tacos.
and, and my mom and I dress in red and we remember just that southern boy. Taco, what's a taco?
We
And,
used to, so
and it makes us laugh.
yeah.
And I remember the first time that we put two and two together where we were like, oh my gosh, like his date was that date and the whole, and it was probably one of the first, it was, I think, the year after he died. And that was probably one of the first times we'd had a really good laugh
Yeah.
about that memory since his death. And I'm here decades after that
Yeah.
talking about him, remembering him. And whenever that happens on a call, I always want to share someday you will be able to talk about your loved one with a smile on your face and warmth in your heart, and the love does
Yeah.
not go away.
And I think that comes from practice, right? Like it's hard at first. Like when we do our introductions in my group, it's hard for talk about your person and how they died or how they lived or anything. But it's through that practice, it's through that repetition that it does get easier. It does get easier because you get more comfortable with the story and remembering. Let's bring it back to based on love and connection, one of those basic needs. It's like to tell their stories and to share about their lives.
Yeah. So self care is also getting comfortable with the story.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not, self care doesn't mean that it's easy, right? Like
Oh,
it's not necessarily
no.
easy.
Oh,
Sometimes it's really
yeah.
difficult.
And sometimes it's easy. It
And
just
sometimes it's easy.
depends.
And sometimes it's funny.
It can
Yeah.
be so many things.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us. I hope
Yeah.
you found this super helpful. hit the subscribe button if you liked it. Jason and I love it when you do that. And that
Yes.
way you will get notified when our next podcast drops, and it will help other people find it. We also welcome your comments below. Resources will be in the description. And if you want to suggest a topic, we are always open to that. You can just put it down there. All
Yeah, put
right.
it in the comments so that this way we definitely read them, put them in there so we know what we should talk about. Awesome.
And may you have as peaceful of a year as possible.